Want insight, encouragement, and the truth about writing, speaking, and creating? Welcome to For Writers and Speakers, the Called Creatives podcast with myself, Lisa Whittle.
And I'm Alli Worthington. Today's guest is Bri McKoy. She's a blogger, future YouTuber. She's going to let you know about that. And author of the recent The Cook's Book. She is an absolute delight, and you are going to have a great time. Let's dive in.
Well, we are so thrilled to have the one and only someone I call Sunshine, Bri McKoy, who calls herself an accidental home cook turned cookbook author, actually of a new cookbook called The Cook's Book. It's fabulous. We'll talk about it a little more later. And she's also a kitchen teacher. I learned a few things from her myself. Welcome, Bri.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
This is so fun today. Okay, so let's talk about this because when you call yourself an accidental home cook, people want to know, how do you accidentally become a home cook?
I really lived my full 26 years of life, like not cooking, not learning to cook, not wanting to cook. I just thought that was like a badge of honor for me. I was like, I eat. That's what I do. You know, other people can cook and I will eat the food. I have many other gifts and talents that I can put into the world. But after I got married, my husband, like a few months into marriage, he was like, hey, we actually can't eat out every night. And I was like, what? I was like, no, yes, how are we going to eat? Who's going to feed us? And so he was like, let's learn to cook. And I just stumbled into the kitchen. Really, I burned so many things. It was the biggest learning curve for me because I really knew nothing. Like, I remember reading a recipe that said add a pinch of salt, and I was like, what's a pinch? I was literally looking at my tablespoons like, is there something like called a pinch in here? I did not know what to do. And so I ended up cooking my way through a cookbook. People in our neighborhood were they would come over and I would feed them truly like burnt and dried out chicken, but they were curious about my journey and were asking me all these questions. And so, of course, what do? You know, 8-10 years ago, you start a food blog when you think you're learning something. So I was like, I'm going to start a food blog. And it was mostly to share kind of the hilarious mistakes I was making. But one day, probably maybe a year or two into cooking, I realized like, oh, wait, I really like this. Like, I really like cooking.
So fun.
I just think of all the things that I've wanted to through the years. I should start a blog about this.
Right?
When I was really terrible at it, but I was really excited, so sometimes enthusiasm makes up for skill in the beginning.
Oh, yes.
It really does.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's
okay,
what, and I was so enthusiastic about the cooking, even though the food was not good.
I have shared my share of really dry, burnt, terrible chicken. When my husband and I were first married, I served him chicken that you bought frozen, like in a big package from Sam's Club with grill marks on it. We don't have a grill. And so when he sat down and ate it, he was like, oh, this is great. Did you cook this? Did you grill this? And I was like, yes, I did. He's so kind. He never said a word. Okay. So you have the food blog. Was the food blog like most things where you build it and it's just like trickle of people for a few years and then it kind of starts to compound? What was that journey like in building an audience?
Yes. So I, at the time, worked for a nonprofit and I was on a web team. And what was really cool is that the team got excited that I started this food blog and they were like, let's like SEO the ish out of this for you.
Nice.
So they just jumped in and they were like, keyword phrases, name it like this, do your photos. Like, they really taught me how to do a lot of SEO. So my blog became popular first through just Google search, like what to substitute for baking soda and how to sharpen your knives, how to cook food without it sticking to your pan, a lot of like how to. And that is where my blog really started to grow. And then I also was because of this nonprofit, Compassion International, I love them to this day. But because of them, I also, being on the web team, started working for Compassion bloggers and started to get connected to a lot of other bloggers. And they saw my blog. They started sharing my blog. And that's where I started to, I guess, amass a little bit of a following. But it wasn't very trickle. It wasn't like an overnight success at all. It was very like slow trickle. And then because of who I knew, which do you all think this has changed a little bit? I ended up signing a book deal 7 years ago because of who I knew.
Mm-hmm.
Like
Mhm.
solely. I had no followers. I think I had like 1,000 followers on Instagram. They were really looking at the site growth on my blog, but really it was like, wait, you know this person? Wait, you've had coffee with this person? And
Yeah.
so that's the reason I got a book deal. 100%.
What I hear you saying though in that is, in that whole story, is some very practical things even in that too though. You leaned into studying what was going on, what was working, what was not working. You leaned into that. You were taking note, right? So yeah,
Yeah.
you definitely had the connections as well, which is another practical point too. That's something that Alli and I talk about a lot in Call Creatives. We say, hey, connect with people, make real relationships. What people want to do is fast track all the time.
Yes.
They want to just, hey, will you look at my book? Will you look at my blog? Will you look at my article I wrote? Will you, they want to make these sort of like faux relationships. They're not even relationships. They just want to
Right.
network, right? We love networking. We're all for networking. But what we're also saying is the things that are really going to carry you far and fast is the actual relationships that you build and that you make. And there's nothing wrong with tapping into relationship.
Yep.
It's just that you have to make real ones in order to get you anywhere, you know?
Yes. Yeah, that's so true. And something that was really important to me, and I kind of have seen it carried throughout as my platform has grown a little bit, is I wanted to show that I am a supporter of the person I am connecting with. Like I'm going to buy your book. I'm going to share it to my audience. I'm going to actually, if it is a cookbook, maybe I'm going to cook from your book. And so I really, like you were saying, it was important to me that the relationships that I was making weren't just like, this is going to benefit me, period.
Mm.
It was
Mm.
really important that I was like, I also want to add benefit to you in this relationship.
Can we talk about criticism for a minute?
Yes.
Because, you're starting out, kudos to you. I agree with Alli. Like the enthusiasm took you into this sort of place. I have to tell you, that's way braver than I would have been. I think it's amazing though. A lot of people have ideas or they want to do things, and the first little bit of criticism just sends them into a fetal position.
Oh my gosh.
How have you handled criticism?
Oh, well, don't I don't read the review. I don't read reviews.
Okay.
Actually, I heard someone say this, and I thought it was so good. It was an author, and she was saying like reviews are not for the writer. Reviews are for other readers. She's like, do not go down that. She was like a New York Times bestselling author of like romance novels or whatever. But I just thought that was good because I was like, yeah, sometimes I sit down and I will read these reviews. And I think I got a 1-star review on Come and Eat that was like, this is not a cookbook. And I was like, but it's not a cookbook. I was like, but it's not. I was like, what are you talking about? But I think the thing that was the biggest hurdle for me was believing that I had value outside of my connection to compassion. That
Wow.
that took me out. Like for 2 years after leaving compassion, still thought when other bloggers would reach out to me, it was because of compassion. Like, and sometimes it was, sometimes where people were like, can you get me connected to the next compassion person, things like that. And so I remember Emily Freeman and Tish Oxenreider invited me on a trip for writers. And I was like, why am I in this room? I remember just like looking at all the other writers in the room and I was like, why am I here? I truly thought like I was waiting for them to be like, can we do a compassion trip or whatever? It took a really long time for people to stop being like Bri compassion and switch to Bri food blogger. And I should say, it didn't take a long time for people to do that. It took a long time for me to believe that. Because Emily was like, I remember sitting in the room and I was like crying, as we do in this work, just being like, why am I in this room? Like, you're a New York Times bestseller. You have this many followers. You have this many this. You've written this many books. I don't understand why I'm in here. And I was like, it's because of compassion. Like, I just believed that. And Emily was like, you're here because you've written a book and you're a writer. And it's a writer's retreat.
I love that. Now, okay, so after that trip, was it like, okay, I am a writer, they value me for me, or is this something that you still would wrestle with that would pop up every once in a while?
Oh, it probably continued because what happened on that trip when I was crying in that room, being like, I don't know what I'm doing. This job is so lonely. I still feel like my worth is because of the nonprofit I used to work for. I asked Kendra, Adachi, and Jamie B. Golden, they were on this trip, and they had kind of formed like their own small little mastermind. And I asked them, I was just like, can I be in your mastermind? And they were like, okay. And then Laura Tremaine, Jamie was like, someone else that I am friends with needs a mastermind. So we formed this mastermind, which was massively helpful to me and my work. I mean, the mastermind is the reason the Cook's Book exists, period. But for probably 2 years, I would get off our monthly Zoom calls and just like feel so unworthy. And people would say that to me. People, my followers sometimes would say, how'd you end up in that mastermind? And I'd be like, that's how I feel. How did I end up in here with these women like who were doing, so much further ahead of me? So it took, even after that trip, I think 2 years to feel like I belonged in this room.
I don't know if you can tell us any secrets, but when you are in an incredible mastermind like that, what is the current biggest mastermind secret that you feel like you could tell us right now that the audience would love to know, like a wonderful piece of business advice or author advice or something like that would just be, ooh, I'm a fly on the wall in the mastermind right now, and this is what I've just heard, and it's amazing.
Ooh, that's a good question. Something that we do, which always shocks people, is we do share, every single number, like how much money did you make on that? How much, we don't hold back on that, where I think that's where it can feel a little bit into like, oh, I don't want to tell everybody I failed on that project, or I thought I was going to make more money on that project, or, and so we will just say like, we'll just like, Kendra, how much did you make on that? And you just, we just answer. And sometimes we're like, oh no. And sometimes, oh my gosh. And I think that's part of the success of the mastermind is we just don't hold back. You need to come tell us, even if you feel like the number that I shared, that was just like, what is happening? I launched, it's been 7 years between books. So I wrote Come and Eat, and then I wrote the Cook's Book. I am so out of book launch. Like, I don't know what I'm doing. Things change every year, I feel like, with book launches.
Oh yeah.
And so I'm like, I'm going to do a launch team. Like, I'm going to do a launch team, thinking like those were still as like fun and like sexy as they were 7 years ago. Oh, I did a launch team for Come and Eat. Oh, no. When I did a launch team for Come and Eat, I had, I think, less than 1,000 followers, and I had 90 people sign up for the launch team. And my publishing house was like, oh my gosh, that's so amazing. So this time I thought, oh, I'm going to have like hundreds. I'm going to be like beating the people back with like a broom, like stay back. And I launched my launch team, like ready. 70 people. Then I had 30,000 some followers.
Yeah.
And I was like, how did I have more? And so I just went to the mastermind, and I was like, I need you all to tell me what you think about this. And they were like, that's bad. So we'll just tell each other, like, given your, like, but they also were like, launch teams don't work the way they used to.
Yeah.
We're laughing because we were late.
2023. Yeah. We know.
What happened to launch teams? No one cares anymore. I think Jamie was the one that was like, they found out it's free labor. And I was like, that's
it's
right.
Saturation. Yeah. It's saturation. Yeah. We've all milked the life out of launch teams. They're tired.
Yeah.
They're tired.
They've done enough.
And I'm like, and I wasn't even giving them, I was like, you can see it wasn't even the PDF of the book. My publishing house was like, we can give them like the just black and white words, no photos. So it's like, I'm not even giving them anything.
Yeah. It's not the way it was. And that's why it is good. Like every 6 months, every 12 months to go, what's working? Because everything changes all the time. And speaking of what's working, we would love some audience building tips for you. How do you build social, or how do you build on email? Because again, that changes all the time too. What's actually working now?
I feel like what's working now is I really have honed in on engagement, and that has become really important to me. And so I feel like there's something about if you see these followers come in and leave, and whatever it is. But I will make sure, like I'll respond to every comment. I respond to every DM. Sometimes I'll do voice DMs. And it's so crazy because I just think like, it's just Bri sending a voice and people will be like, oh my gosh, like, I can't believe you sent me a voice DM. And so doing those like little fun things that I feel like kind of surprised, like shock and surprise in a good way. Like, oh, she responded to this or she took time to say this. But as for like actually bringing the people in, it's through reels have been really helpful for me, which I think that's also because the nature of food blogs, like people
Yes.
like to visually see food.
Yes.
Reels, and then having my peers share something I'm doing. So, and that's another thing in the mastermind that's been really helpful is we will just go to each other and be like, hey, I'm doing this launch next week. It's really important to me. Like, will you please, Jamie, will you do an Instagram story? Kendra, will you mention it in your newsletter? Laura, can I like have an ad on your podcast or whatever it is? And we don't always say yes to each other. Sometimes they're like, no, like I'm actually launching my own thing. But if you can reach out to people or even like people who have a similar, like your people would love this queso. Will you please like share my reel with your people? And so I think having them get out to a bigger audience or to a different audience has been the way that I can bring people in.
Mm. So what if someone is out there and they say, I don't have a mastermind like this. I don't have these high level folks that I'm friends with and they haven't developed that at this point. What would you tell them about the way that they could start right now, right where they are? Maybe they are in that fresh stage, kind of go back to that in your brain of where you were, Bri, at that moment, and give them a piece of advice.
I would say the most helpful thing that I did, and I'm actually about to do it again. So this was before I had a mastermind. This was before the writer's retreat. I think Come and Eat had just come out and I didn't know what I was doing because I didn't know publishing houses rely on you to get the book out. I was like, it was like, are you going to go sell this now? What am I supposed to do? I don't have any followers. Yeah. Shocker. I was like, what is the point here? What's happening? But I was really in like a shut it down place. Like, I'm just going to shut it down. Like, I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know what's working. And I just committed to, and I've done this now multiple times in this career where I'll say for 12 months, do this, do X for 12 months and then reevaluate. Mm. And you are not allowed to reevaluate until 12 months. And so the first time I did it, it was like, I'm going to create a new recipe every week and post on Instagram 3 times a week. And this was the time where like posting on Instagram often was very important. I don't feel like it's as important anymore, but for like a year, I did that. And then at the end of the year, I was like, oh my gosh, I had numbers too. Like I wrote down, like, I want to see this many Instagram followers, this many newsletter signups, and revenue. Like I want to see this amount of revenue. And I just was like, just put your head down and do the work. No evaluating. And that really helped me too, because I'm someone that will just very impulse be like, nothing's working, I'm done. Yeah. But then after 12 months, I was like, I had hit all the numbers and I was like, okay, like this is working. Like keep going. I'm about to do it with YouTube. I'm going to start my YouTube channel. And I'm like, for 12 months, I am not allowed to shut it down. Like for 12 months, I need to post. I'm going to post once a week. And I think that really helped because I am someone who definitely will see like a massive like unfollows and just be like, nothing's working.
Yeah. That's good.
Yeah. That's really a theme I'm hearing from you is consistency and being patient with things. Kind of like you mentioned, what got you all of the initial traction with your blog. It wasn't the friends. What got you your initial traction was SEO. And SEO takes 6 months, 12 months, 18 months before it ever shows any work. And then for you to go, okay, on Instagram, I'm committing, I'm going to post like this for a year. For YouTube, I'm going to post for a year, once a week. That is the key to success, because when we get in our heads, like it's going to be quick, it's going to be easy. It's really, you've been at this, 8, 10 years now.
Yeah.
And you're at the top of your game, but it's because you've been putting in the consistent work. So thank you for sharing that with us. Thank you for sharing your vision. Thank you for sharing how you work. We are thrilled to have you on the show. And on behalf of the entire Called Creatives crew and everyone listening, we're so grateful.
I'm so grateful. I love sharing. Usually I don't get to talk about that side of the business much. So I love sharing it.
Yes. And congrats on your new book, The Cook's Book. Go get that wherever books are sold. It is fantastic, just like you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Bri.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us today on the Called Creatives podcast. Hey, if you want to finally write that book, be sure to download the free book proposal that we've created for you at calledcreatives.com/book-proposal. Happy writing.